The decision of a lifetime choosing between family and freedom. A few years ago, life threw a curveball that led me to a decision I never anticipated, one that questioned the very foundation of what it means to be a family. In my early 20s, I met and married my husband, a kind-hearted man with 3 young children from his previous marriage. Although his past was a world away from the life we planned together, his children were a part of our lives. However, our time together was limited, often scattered across weekends and short holiday breaks. The children were primarily with their mother, a figure who, even after years apart, was visibly resistant to my presence. Her guarded nature, mixed with lingering emotional wounds from their recent divorce, made it clear she intended to keep her children as her own. She firmly remained in their lives as the primary influence, while I was cast more as a distant, almost spectral presence, barely woven into their daily routines. Years passed, and then, just as life had started settling into a routine, tragedy struck. My husband, the anchor of our family, passed away in a sudden accident, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. In the shock and sorrow of losing him, I found myself grieving in isolation. The children's mother continued to raise them alone, and I, though emotionally connected, drifted further from the family we had once envisioned. The memories of family holidays, of laughter and shared moments, haunted me, but the daily responsibilities of parenting were behind me, until, in a fateful phone call, their mother reached out with a shocking request. She was diagnosed with a terminal illness, a brain tumor. Her voice was strained with worry as she asked me to take in her children after her passing. In her words, there was desperation. She wanted to know her children would be cared for. And the thought of leaving them to face the world without a familiar face was heartbreaking. But I was conflicted. Could I be a mother to children I barely knew? Would it be fair to them, or to me, to jump into a role I had never fully occupied? The weight of the responsibility loomed, leaving me questioning my abilities, my commitments, and my sense of duty. In exploring my options, I sought advice from close friends, even strangers, hoping someone would say something that could absolve the guilt of my reluctance. One friend shared an eerily similar story. After her husband's sudden passing, she had raised his teenage daughter from a previous relationship. The emotional toll was severe, as her stepdaughter's resentment and grief projected onto her, making every day a battle. For years, she struggled with her own decision, wishing she had prepared for the enormity of the situation. In that moment, I realized I was balancing on a knife's edge between love and obligation. Financially, I could manage, but would finances alone make up for the emotional and psychological investment required to raise 3 children who had already endured so much loss? I wrestled with the thought of taking on full responsibility, imagining myself navigating the heart-wrenching questions of children who had lost not one, but 2 parents. And what if I couldn't connect with them? Would they resent me, viewing me not as a mother, but as a reminder of the parents they'd lost? This internal battle stretched over days, and my sleep was riddled with dreams of children's voices calling out, begging for answers I didn't have. The night before I had to give her my decision, I wrote a list of every possible outcome, weighing the sacrifices against the benefits. But my heart remained divided. I knew that choosing not to adopt them might forever brand me as a heartless person in their eyes. Yet, deep down, I sensed that forcing myself into motherhood, especially under these circumstances, could create an environment of resentment and unfulfilled expectations. The morning arrived with a heavy heart, and I made the call. Her voice was hopeful, fragile, as she waited for my answer. I told her the truth. I couldn't do it. I could hear the pain in her reaction, and her quiet sobs echoed through the phone, deepening my guilt. After our conversation ended, the silence was deafening. I had chosen my own path, one that allowed me to continue living the life I had come to know. But at what cost? Reflecting on that decision has since become an essential part of my journey. The experience taught me that sometimes, love is not about self-sacrifice at all costs. The strength to say no, even when it feels wrong, is necessary when the alternative could be worse for everyone involved. We cannot save everyone, especially when doing so might leave us lost in the process. And for the children, I can only hope that they find love and stability in the care of others who are better equipped to support them. To anyone facing a similar choice, my story is a reminder. True strength sometimes lies in acknowledging our limitations and choosing what aligns with our truth. And while guilt may linger, The path to peace is one of self-forgiveness. From rejection to resilience, my journey from homelessness to triumph, and the family that tried to take it all. When I was 16, the idea of family was little more than a fantasy one clung to. My parents, my twin sister, and I lived under one roof. But the warmth and love that people imagine within family walls had never been part of my experience. This is the story of how I went from being kicked out by my own blood, struggling to survive, to finding success, only to have those same people show up, demanding to share in the life I'd fought so hard to build. It all began in high school, where I juggled teenage worries, school assignments, and the constant feeling of being the odd one out in my own family. My sister was my opposite in every way. She was charismatic, lively, and the clear favorite of my parents. It was no secret to anyone who knew us. Our parents doted on her, showered her with gifts and privileges, and gave her every bit of love I felt I'd been denied. It stung, but I tried to brush it off. It was my life, after all, and feeling sorry for myself wouldn't change that. But looking back now, I realized that it wasn't just favoritism. My parents held a deep-seated resentment toward me, almost as if they saw my existence as a mistake. By the time my sister and I turned 16, the tension at home had reached a breaking point. My sister's reckless decisions, fueled by a constant need for attention and validation, led her down a dangerous path. She got involved with a man 3 years her senior, a high school dropout with no job, no ambition, and no future. My parents, desperate to keep her out of trouble, went to great lengths to cover up her actions. I watched as they showered her with support, went out of their way to protect her, and made arrangements to keep her out of trouble. When she got pregnant, I thought this might be the moment where my parents would finally hold her accountable. Instead, they did the opposite. They married her off to the boyfriend, moved him into our already cramped home, and, in a twist that still stuns me, decided that I was the one who had to go. They claimed there was no room for me anymore. Kicked out with little more than a backpack of essentials and the clothes on my back. I was thrust into a world I wasn't remotely prepared for. I was a teenager with no money, no job, and no plan. For the first few weeks, I slept on friends' couches, scraping by on their generosity. But as time passed, their parents began to ask questions, and I could see the discomfort in their eyes. I knew I couldn't impose forever. So I gathered my courage, packed my few belongings, and started sleeping in a nearby park. Nights were long, cold, and filled with fear. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant voice, sent shivers down my spine. At 16, I was essentially homeless, trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to break me. The loneliness was overwhelming, but the experience taught me a resilience I never knew I had. My goal became simple: survive. I applied for every job I could find, from stocking shelves to washing dishes. But the reality was that most places wouldn't even consider hiring a homeless teenager. Eventually, a local bakery took a chance on me. The owner offered me a place to sleep in the storage room in exchange for working the early morning shifts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, and it gave me the first glimmer of stability I'd had since leaving home. Over time, I saved enough money to rent a small, dilapidated room in a shared house. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked tirelessly, taking on extra shifts, picking up odd jobs, and doing everything I could to scrape together a living. Years passed, and slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. I took classes to gain new skills, worked my way up in different jobs, and eventually landed a position at an automobile manufacturing plant. The work was hard, and the hours were long, but I didn't mind. For the first time, I was on a path that felt like it could lead somewhere. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building a future. Every paycheck was a reminder of how far I'd come, and every promotion was a testament to the work I'd put in. Then, something unexpected happened. An old friend contacted me, needing to sell his house quickly due to a divorce. He offered me a significant discount and allowed me to pay the down payment in installments. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for such a big step. But deep down, I knew this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. After all, having a home of my own was something I dreamed of since those first nights sleeping on the streets. So, I took the plunge. I bought the house, and for the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of pride and accomplishment. But just when I thought I could finally relax and enjoy the fruits of my labor, My past came crashing back into my life. Out of nowhere, my parents, my sister, and her husband showed up at my doorstep. They hadn't spoken to me in years, hadn't reached out during my struggles, and hadn't even known where I lived. And now here they were, standing on my porch, acting as though they'd come for a friendly visit. My mother congratulated me on the house. My father looked around with a hint of envy, and my sister immediately started eyeing the rooms as if she were picking one for herself. Their intentions became clear very quickly. My sister was pregnant with her fourth child, and they were all living in a cramped rental house. They expected me to let them move in, free of charge, because, as they put it, family looks out for each other. I was speechless. Here were the same people who had thrown me out without a second thought, demanding a place in the life I'd built without their help. It was as if they saw my success as something they were entitled to, rather than something I'd earned through years of sacrifice and hard work. When I refused, tensions flared. My father tried to guilt me, insisting that it was my responsibility as the man of the family to take care of my sister. My mother played the sympathy card, talking about how difficult life had been for them and how much they needed my help. But I stood firm. I told them that they had made their choice years ago when they threw me out, and that I didn't owe them anything. My sister screamed at me, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. But I knew better. I had learned long ago that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, support, and respect, none of which they had shown me. The encounter left me shaken, but I thought it was over. I was wrong. A few days later, while I was at work, my neighbor called to tell me he'd seen my sister, her husband, and their children trying to break into my house. They had pried open a window and let themselves in, claiming they had no other options. When I arrived, they were already settled in, acting as if it were their home. My sister smirked, her husband lounged on my couch, and their children ran around, leaving a mess in their wake. I was livid. I told them to get out, but they refused, saying they had a right to be there as my family. Desperate, I called the police. When they arrived, my family tried to spin a story, claiming they were only there because I had invited them to stay. But my neighbor came forward as a witness, and they were forced to leave. That was the final straw. I knew then that I couldn't let them keep disrupting my life. I filed charges for breaking and entering and sought a restraining order. It was a difficult decision, but one I knew I had to make if I was ever going to find peace. Reflecting on everything, I realized just how much I had grown. The boy who once slept in parks, feeling abandoned and unloved, had become a man capable of standing up for himself. My journey taught me that strength isn't about facing challenges alone, but about finding the courage to protect what you've built, even if it means standing up to those who claim to be family. In the end, the lesson was clear. Family is not defined by blood alone, but by the love, respect, and support you share. And sometimes, the hardest part of moving forward is letting go of those who only seek to pull you back. I hope that sharing my story will remind others that they have the right to protect their peace and that, with enough determination, it is possible to overcome even the most difficult beginnings. Faith Under Fire. The youth band's stand against Christian nationalism. In a small, tightly knit community, the church wasn't just a building, it was the heart of social life. The place where friendships formed, and families grew closer. Every Sunday, people gathered not just to hear the word of God but to feel connected to each other. But one Sunday, a single statement from the youth band's lead singer changed everything. Emma, a 20-year-old with a powerful voice and an even stronger sense of conviction, took a brave stand against the church's direction, and in doing so, sent shockwaves through her congregation and her own life. It began on an unassuming Sunday morning. The youth band, a vibrant group of teens and young adults, was set to lead the worship. Emma, beloved by the congregation, stood confidently before the crowd. She was known for her kindness and dedication to her faith. But that day, she was feeling something deeper, a pull to speak a message she felt was urgently needed. Emma had grown troubled by the rising influence of Christian nationalism within the church. She'd seen the church's messages subtly shift over time, emphasizing a vision of Christianity that was intertwined with national politics. She watched the congregation cheer as sermons veered into political territory, mentioning Project 2025 and celebrating political victories as if they were divine mandates. She listened, week after week, to subtle hints that only one way of thinking could align with Christianity. And yet, Everything she'd been taught about God seemed to contradict these sentiments. As the last song faded, Emma stepped forward and spoke into the microphone. Her voice steady but her heart pounding. "Christian nationalism," she said, "isn't a part of God's plan. God gave us free will. And to coerce people into any belief, that goes against the essence of our faith. We were never meant to walk a forced path." She could feel the room tense. She went on, briefly mentioning how Project 2025, though presented as a Christian initiative, bore little resemblance to the teachings of Jesus, who never forced anyone to follow him. The statement hung in the air, and though she continued singing, Emma knew she had taken a step that couldn't be undone. What Emma didn't anticipate was the response from church leadership. By the end of the week, the pastor had banned her from returning to lead worship, explaining to the congregation that her absence was due to the church's desire to give other voices a chance. But word spread, and it didn't take long for people to realize Emma was effectively exiled for speaking out. When the youth band found out, their reaction was swift. Shock turned to anger, and anger turned to resolve. They discussed their options quietly, away from the congregation's ears. They knew that many of them faced repercussions if they spoke out. Some depended on their parents financially, especially for college tuition, and standing up against church leadership could mean losing that crucial support. But they felt a deep conviction, a belief that remaining silent would be the same as agreeing. The group decided that during their next Sunday performance, they would take a stand. They planned to perform the opening song, then deliver a short statement in support of Emma before walking off stage in protest. It was a bold move, and each of them knew it could mean expulsion from the church and strained relationships with their families. In the days leading up to the planned walkout, they wrestled with fear and doubt. One of the band members, Sarah, confided in her teacher, Mrs. Greer, about the situation. Mrs. Greer, though no longer religious herself, had been a person of faith for many years. She understood the courage it took to confront religious authorities and promised Sarah she'd be there, sitting in the pews, ready to walk out with them if things went awry. Each band member found unexpected allies. For Emma's close friend Jack, it was his uncle, a non-believer but a strong advocate for freedom of thought, who offered his support. Jack's uncle even planned to wait in his car outside the church, prepared to help in case things got out of hand. The night before the walkout, the group met one last time to finalize their plan. They prayed together, asking for guidance and courage, and rehearsed the speech they planned to deliver. It was a brief but powerful statement about faith and integrity, written by Emma's best friend, Lucas. Lucas, normally shy and soft-spoken, felt a fire he'd never experienced before. He was ready to read the statement aloud and set the tone for their walkout. On Sunday, as they took the stage, the church was packed. People filled the pews, unaware of what was about to happen. The band began their opening song, their voices filling the sanctuary with a harmony that echoed their unity. When the song ended, Lucas stepped forward. His voice was clear, though his hands trembled. "Today," he began, "we want to honor a dear friend, Emma, who had the courage to speak her truth. She reminded us that faith should never be used as a tool to control, and that free will is a gift from God. We love our church, but we believe that faith and politics don't belong together. For us, faith should be about love, not power." The room fell silent. Then, one by one, each band member placed their instruments down and walked off the stage. The congregation watched, stunned. Some members exchanged glances, whispering in disbelief, while others looked on in quiet admiration. The walkout had a ripple effect. Over the following weeks, members of the congregation began questioning their own beliefs and the church's direction. Families who had quietly felt uncomfortable with the political overtones began to speak up, questioning whether the church they loved had drifted from its spiritual roots. Emma's story didn't end with the walkout. As weeks turned into months, she found herself building a new community outside the church, one that cherished open dialogue and sought faith over politics. Her story spread beyond her local church, inspiring others to reflect on the role of faith in their lives. She received messages from people she'd never met, thanking her for her courage and sharing their own struggles with church and faith. In time, Emma understood that her journey was bigger than a single statement or walkout. It was a journey of personal conviction, of standing for what she believed was true, even when it meant standing alone. For each person who reached out to her, she offered support, encouragement, and the hope that faith could be something pure and freeing, not bound by the constraints of political agendas. Her experience became a lesson for many, a reminder that faith is deeply personal and that integrity often requires standing up to power. Emma learned that true strength doesn't come from the applause of others but from the quiet assurance of a clear conscience. And as she moved forward, she carried with her the belief that she, like everyone, had the right to seek a faith rooted in love, honesty, and freedom.